So, you're thinking of starting a business. That's fantastic. But one of the very first and honestly, one of the most critical decisions you'll make has nothing to do with your product or your marketing plan. Nope, it's about the legal structure you choose. You got to think of it like choosing your armor before you head out into battle.
I mean, that's where it all begins, right? With that dream, that one brilliant idea that gets into your head and just won't let go. It's exciting, it's full of possibility, and it's the spark that lights up every great entrepreneurial journey.
But, and this is a big but, that dream can get real complicated real fast if you don't take steps to protect yourself. That's why the most important question to ask isn't just, how do I make this idea a success? It's also, how do I protect myself if things go sideways?
And that question brings us right to the heart of the matter today, this scary-sounding thing called unlimited liability. Seriously, this is the big one. This is the concept that means if your business owes money, creditors can come after your personal stuff. We're talking your house, your car, your personal savings. Everything could be on the line.
Okay, so where do most people begin? Well, usually they start with one of these simplest structures out there. In fact, a lot of people fall into them without even realizing it. It's kind of the default path. First up, you've got the sole trader. This is about as straightforward as it gets. If you start working for yourself and don't register as anything else, congratulations, you're a sole trader. The absolute key thing to get your head around here is that in the eyes of the law, there is zero separation between you and your business. So, what does that actually mean? Well, on the plus side, you have total control. It's your ship to steer. You can pull money out of the business whenever you want, and there's no mountain of legal paperwork to get started. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This is where that unlimited liability comes back to bite you. You are the business, so if a client sues you or you can't pay your suppliers, they can come after your personal wealth to settle the debt. Now, what happens if you don't go it alone? Let's say you team up with a friend. If two or more of you go into business together and don't officially form a company, you've just created a partnership. This is super common for businesses like law firms or accounting practices. So with a partnership, you'll have an agreement that lays out who's responsible for what and how you'll split the profits. But listen to this, the liability part, it gets even more intense. Partners are what's called jointly and severally liable. In plain English, that means if the business owes $1 million, creditors can go after any single partner for the entire amount. Yeah, even if your partner's mistake caused the debt, they can still come after you for all of it. Your personal assets are still totally exposed.
Facing that kind of personal risk is, well, it's terrifying. And that's exactly why the invention of limited liability was such a revolutionary, game-changing idea. It's like a legal shield that changes everything for an entrepreneur.
And you can see the difference clear as day right here. With unlimited liability, you and the business are one and the same. The risk is personal and it's total. But with limited liability, something amazing happens. The business becomes its own separate legal person. And just like that, your personal assets are protected. Your risk is limited to whatever you've invested in the business. Your house is safe. Your car is safe. It is a total game changer.
So how do you get this magical shield? Well, you form what's called a limited company. By doing this, you create a business that has its own legal identity, one that is completely separate from its owners, who we now call shareholders.
So what does this separate legal identity really mean in the real world? Well, it means the company itself can own property, it can sign contracts, it can even go to court to sue someone or be sued itself. The owners, the shareholders, are separate. And here's the knockout punch. If the company gets into financial trouble, creditors can only go after the company's assets. They cannot touch your personal wealth. That is the shield in action. Okay, but what if you're thinking, I want that protection, that shield, but I still like the flexibility of a partnership? Well, that's where the Limited Liability Partnership, or LLP, comes into play. It's a clever hybrid model that tries to give you the best of both worlds. You get the limited liability protection for all its members, but it still operates and gets taxed more like a traditional partnership. This little table is a fantastic cheat sheet. Just look at the first two rows, legal identity and liability. See that? For a partnership, it's not separate and unlimited. But for both an LLP and a limited company, it's separate and limited. That right there is the fundamental difference. Then, of course, you can see how they differ in things like taxes and the kind of paperwork you have to file, which are also really important factors in your decision.
All right, so let's say you've decided you definitely want the protection of a limited company. Great, but guess what? There's another fork in the road. You have to decide. Do you want to keep things private and maintain control, or do you need to go public to get the funding for massive growth?
And this is the basic trade-off. A private limited company, often shown as LTD, can't sell its shares to the general public. This is perfect for family-run businesses or startups that want to keep a really tight grip on control. On the other hand, a public limited company, or a PLC, can sell its shares on a stock exchange. This is how you raise huge amounts of money for big-time expansion, but it comes with a lot more rules, and of course, you give up some of that direct control.
Now that limited liability shield we talked about, it's incredibly powerful, for sure, but it's not free. It comes with its own set of trade-offs and potential headaches. There's always a price for protection. So, what's the catch, right? Why wouldn't every single person on Earth just immediately choose a limited company? Well, it turns out that creating that legal wall between the owners and the business has some real consequences.
For starters, your suppliers and lenders, the creditors, they're at a much higher risk. If your company goes under, they might be left with unpaid bills. For the owners, the shareholders, you can run into something called the agency problem. This is where the managers running the company day-to-day might have different goals, like chasing a big annual bonus, than the owners, who want the company to be healthy and profitable for the next 10 years. And because those managers control the flow of information, they can sometimes hide problems until it's way too late.
So after all that, how in the world do you actually make a choice for your business? Well, it really boils down to asking yourself a few key questions about what you really want and what your vision is.
These are the exact questions you need to sit down and answer. How much cash do you really need, both now and down the road? How much personal risk are you actually willing to stomach? Is getting started quickly more important than having that legal shield right away? How important is it for you to be the one calling all the shots? Be honest with yourself. Your answers will start to point you clearly toward the right structure for you. And as you're thinking, don't forget about that middle ground. For a lot of businesses, especially professional firms where client trust is everything, but they still want that protection, that LLP can be the perfect compromise. It really can blend that liability protection with the flexibility you need. Look, in the end, this decision is so much more than just filling out some paperwork. It is the legal and financial foundation that your entire business, your entire dream is going to be built on. It's what defines your risk, your power to grow, and your control over your own creation. So the final question is, what kind of foundation are you going to choose?